Hello, and welcome to the Pathways.org online lecture on detecting early motor delays at 4 and 6 months of age. If you missed our lecture on detecting delays at 2 months of age, be sure to check it out. Pathways.org is a national not-for-profit organization established in 1985, dedicated to empowering parents and health professionals with free resources on children's sensory, motor, and communication development. All Pathways.org materials are created under the guidance of our medical roundtable members, who are leading physicians, clinicians, and lay advisors. These members are sensitive to the medical and emotional needs of infants and children with early motor delays. We encourage you to visit www.pathways.org to find free videos and handouts, as well as other information on children's developmental milestones. Now, let's begin with a short review of infant motor delays and tummy time, followed by information on detecting delays at 4 and 6 months old. In the past 25 years, there has been a sharp increase in the number of children with early motor delays. An early motor delay may be associated with a wide variety of conditions, ranging from low muscle tone to cerebral palsy, and these delays can affect a child's ability to learn basic skills later in life. Mild motor delays may correct on their own, but in some cases, they may lead to secondary complications and may require more extensive therapy and even surgical intervention when not treated early. For example, a baby with torticollis is at risk for developing plagiocephaly and possibly impaired binocular vision. Early intervention and early therapy help facilitate more typical head and neck movement, reducing the risk of developing a problem such as ongoing asymmetry or contracture. The potential impact of identifying an early motor delay at 2, 4, or 6 months of age is immense, and it may improve the long-term quality of a child's life. One thing that can be encouraged that may help babies better meet their developmental milestones is tummy time. Tummy time is supervised time babies spend on their stomachs while awake. Today, a vast majority of babies sleep on their backs as a result of the Back to Sleep campaign, which has reduced the incidence of sudden infant death syndrome by 50%. However, since the introduction of the Back to Sleep campaign, research shows, with the change in sleep position, infants are slower to attain major milestones such as rolling over, sitting up, creeping, crawling, and pulling to stand. Back sleeping, along with more awake time spent in containers such as car seats, bouncers, swings, and strollers, means babies now miss out on a lot of valuable tummy time. Tummy time is important and helps babies develop their core, back, neck, and shoulder muscles so they can reach developmental milestones. Experts recommend babies be placed in a variety of positions while awake, including on their tummies, as soon as they return home from the hospital. Increasing tummy time while baby is awake and limiting time spent in containers can help children meet major milestones and reduce risk of developing positional plagiocephaly or positional torticollis. If you need tips on how to do tummy time, be sure to review our 5 essential tummy time moves handout and video. Now that we have reviewed tummy time, let's talk more about surveillance. Before we begin, it is important to remember we are not teaching any sort of test to check for delays. All we are doing is encouraging you to use observation to identify possible delays in a child's development. In 1993, Paul Dworkin, a leading pediatrician, defined developmental surveillance as a flexible, continuous process whereby knowledgeable professionals perform skilled observations of children during the provision of healthcare. The components of developmental surveillance include eliciting and attending to parental concerns, obtaining a relevant developmental history, making accurate and informative observations of children, and sharing opinions and concerns with other relevant professionals. Constant surveillance is key for early detection of developmental delays. When assessing a child, health professionals should observe a child in more than one position to better spot signs of atypical development. Neurodevelopmental examinations aren't necessarily needed to spot an early motor delay. A motor delay, even the milder forms, can be observed as early as 2 months of age with surveillance. Types of questions health professionals can ask themselves when observing include: when you are close to baby's face, will baby look at you with steady eye contact and follow you with their eyes when you move? Is a child freely moving both arms and legs when lying on their back? Is baby able to move in a variety of positions? Is baby's movement symmetrical? Is baby demonstrating progress in acquiring milestones? Once signs of atypical development are understood, health professionals can integrate these observation skills into practice with the goal of referring children to a specialist as early as possible if atypical development is suspected. Now, we are going to watch a video comparison of a typically developing baby and an atypically developing baby. These two boys will be shown in 8 different positions at both 4 and 6 months of age. The positions shown stem from an evaluation created by a Swiss pediatrician, Dr. Elsbeth Kern, who was a pioneer in early intervention. By watching this next film, we hope you will learn the signs of an early motor delay and use them to distinguish typical from atypical development when assessing a child. Learning some of the warning signs of atypical development helps individuals integrate these observation skills into well-child checkups, with the goal of referring children to a specialist as early as possible if atypical development is suspected. Here are the two boys at 4 months old.
Marty is able to maintain his head in midline for long periods now. Midline and symmetry of the head, eyes, arms, and legs is the hallmark of the supine position in 4-month-olds. He demonstrates interest in exploring objects with his hands. Marty is very visual in both horizontal and vertical planes, which leads and drives his movement. There's movement in the forearm, wrist, and individual fingers as he remains visually engaged with the object. His legs bang down on the surface, typical at this age. Extremity movement disassociated from trunk movement is more evident with frequent anti-gravity extremity movement. Babies at this age often can't combine the movements of hands and feet, nor are they always able to coordinate their reach with their vision. When the feet are moving, the hands may be still, and vice versa. By 5 months, we should see Marty consistently moving both hands and feet together, and better able to combine reaching movement with his ability to localize and track an object. Owen still shows much more asymmetry of both the head and extremities than is expected at 4 months. Owen's head is turned to the side, and he shows more activity on the left side of his trunk. Rather than being in a straight line, his body is curved like the letter C. He relies on extension rather than a balance of extension and flexion. The movement associated with repositioning disturbs and disorganizes Owen. It takes him longer to reorganize, though he calms down when reassured. He exhibits random movements in his arms and legs. However, there's not much anti-gravity movement. He appears to be attending to the toy and is moving both arms on the surface but not lifting his shoulder off the surface as expected. When facilitated into a side-lying position, Marty follows along with his upper arm and disassociated lower extremities and is able to sustain the posture, indicating a solid balance of trunk flexor and extensor muscles. He is able to lift his head and upper trunk off the support surface, which is a precursor to being able to roll independently onto his tummy. Babies who can't lift their head and upper trunk usually have trouble rolling, or use a less optimal rolling strategy of excessive neck and trunk extension. Owen does not have the same ability to sustain the side-lying posture as Marty. The top arm is sluggish in its ability to be used to assist in the rolling maneuver. Owen does not lift his head off the support surface to begin head righting, though we would expect a 4-month-old developing typically to demonstrate this response. Owen demonstrates inadequate control in side-lying and in rolling onto the back. Marty is able to get his shoulders and upper arms forward. With his head lifted to 90 degrees, we see extensor muscle activity down into the lumbar spine. His lower extremities still show some flexion and abduction, but he is moving toward exhibiting lower extremity extension. He is beginning to take weight on fisted hands, typical for this age. He is able to turn his head freely and follow a toy side to side. As he turns his head and starts pushing, we can see that this push causes a weight shift to the right side. This will help further extend his leg and let him start the initial movement to rolling onto his back. Notice that the elbows are in front of the shoulders, creating a narrower base of support. Marty is also able to reach forward on the surface for a toy. The ability to bring the arms forward and prone is important because it helps facilitate rolling onto the back. Much as we saw at 2 months, Owen's hips are too flexed, which causes weight to be shifted forward to his shoulders and head. His elbows also remain behind his shoulders. These movement patterns interfere with forearm propping. Owen can lift his head clear of the surface just enough to turn it from one side to the other. He cannot sustain head lifting, however, and he uses only neck extension to turn. Owen is unable to use upper extremity control to shift weight posteriorly onto stable lower extremities, which would provide greater stability for his head and support upper extremity weight bearing. Marty starts out with his head in midline. He shows that he's able to lift his legs and activate his trunk muscles. As he moves towards sitting, we see his head in line with his body from 15 to 30 degrees from upright. There is no delay, no head lag. He has good chin tuck of at least 45 degrees. Throughout the maneuver, he is able to help a little by pulling with his arms. By the end of the movement, he is pulling himself forward with his abdominals, and he doesn't have full activation of the lumbar spine. Owen demonstrates head lag throughout the entire maneuver. Owen does not assist in the pull to sit by pulling with his arms. In fact, there is little to no upper extremity participation throughout the maneuver. He does not appear to anticipate the movement toward the upright position. In supported sitting, we see that Marty is moving into the anterior-posterior planes as he reaches for toys and then sits back up. He's able to pick up this small toy and bring it to his mouth. We see good head control and chin tuck, with head in midline. Babies of this age often reach with one hand, using the other upper extremity for stability until full postural control is developed. His body is supported only at the hips and pelvis. We see extension down to the mid-thoracic spine. Full extension down to the lumbar spine will not be present until 6 months. Even with minimal support at one shoulder, Marty is able to turn his head quickly and easily to localize and grossly follow the toy in all directions without losing his balance. In supported sitting, Owen exhibits a momentary burst of head lifting in midline, but he is unable to maintain that head position for even the briefest period of time. He is unable to turn his head or look side to side even when the examiner provides support at the upper arm and shoulder. The examiner holds him high under the armpits for maximum assistance. Owen has difficulty activating his vision in this position, unlike Marty, who is able to visually fixate on and begin to track a toy. The extremity movement that Owen demonstrates is used to compensate for his decreased strength, control, and stability in the head and trunk. In horizontal suspension, Marty is able to keep his neck and trunk extended as he is tipped forward. He maintains his head upright to 45 degrees above horizontal, holding it steady in midline through the whole maneuver. He shows good trunk extension with scapular adduction, but he is able to freely move his arms and legs in this position. He has trunk extension into the lumbar spine. Owen is able to hold his head up briefly during horizontal suspension, but unable to maintain it in midline. Owen does not demonstrate sustained thoracic trunk extension in this position, and he is unable to extend his hips, indicating poor core strength and stability. Unlike Marty, Owen is unable to sustain the neck and trunk extension when moving his arms and legs. Marty has good extension through the neck, trunk, and hips, and he is able to maintain that extension during quick forward tilting in space. However, because he is using his arms to help him sustain trunk extension, he cannot bring them forward into a full protective response, which should be present by 6 months. Within the next 2 months, he will be able to sustain head and trunk extension throughout the forward tilt without the assistance of his arms, resulting in the full upper extremity protective response by the end of the maneuver. Although a mature protective response is not fully developed until 6 months, even at 4 months, Owen is unable to sustain strong neck, trunk, and hip extension during forward tilting. However, there is adequate neck extension to prevent his head from coming in contact with the surface. To sustain neck and trunk extension, he either uses excessive asymmetry or flexes his arms into his chest to increase the tone in his trunk. When Marty is placed in supported standing, his hips are just behind his shoulders, which puts his ankle into relative plantar flexion. He demonstrates extension in his trunk through the lower thoracic and lumbar spine, but cannot yet achieve full hip extension. By 6 months, Marty's hips should be fully extended, creating a vertical line from his shoulders through his hips, knees, and ankles. Marty can sustain this posture with the examiner holding his lower trunk. He doesn't require assistance to support his weight, but rather to maintain his balance. Marty can maintain his head in midline for an extended period of time or move it freely. Owen is readily able to take weight on his lower extremities, but intermittently flexes at the hip and knees. Owen's shoulders are still well in front of his hips. By 4 months, active trunk extension toward a more upright alignment is expected. Unlike Marty, who is able to sustain standing with support at his lower trunk, the examiner must hold Owen in the upper thoracic area to assist him in maintaining the standing position. Head lifting is achieved using neck extension, but this extension is intermittent. Owen lacks adequate hip and trunk control for sustained supported standing.
Here are the 2 boys at 6 months old.
Immediately when the toy is presented, Marty reaches voluntarily. We see him bring his hands to his feet, and at 6 months, we would also see hands to knees and feet to mouth. These movements help to mobilize the pelvis and increase pelvic femoral mobility. His lower extremities are still abducted and externally rotated. Marty is able to symmetrically lift his upper and lower extremities against gravity, while simultaneously investigating the ring. Marty exhibits disassociated upper and lower arm movement as he grasps and explores the toy by turning it over several times in a well-coordinated motion. Owen's ability to hold his head in midline has improved since we last saw him at 4 months. However, he rarely demonstrates anti-gravity movement, and little abdominal activity is evident despite his apparent visual attention to the toy. Improved abdominal activity would provide the core control to allow anti-gravity flexion toward midline. Owen's lower extremities are abducted and externally rotated with occasional hip flexion and extension during kicking movements. Owen's upper extremities are also abducted and externally rotated with movement primarily on the surface. With assistance in positioning his lower extremities and activating his abdominals, Owen is able to briefly maintain his knees up toward his chest and in midline. He is then able to initiate a burst of active abdominal flexion, lifting his pelvis off the surface. However, he is unable to maintain, grade, or play in this position as expected at this age. Marty visually follows and reaches, then rolls independently and easily through side lying into prone, initiating the movement with his lower extremities. Both the side lying posture and the movement through side lying to prone provide Marty with increased asymmetric tactile input, which is important for eliciting proper head and body righting reactions. Marty chooses not to stay in a side-lying position as he is too interested in play and exploration. Owen's arms rest in a position of passive wide abduction. Owen visually engages with the toy presented, but this visual interest does not translate into arm movement, even as the examiner attempts to facilitate rolling from back to side. Even when the examiner attempts to entice him with a toy, we see the shoulder extension preventing rolling forward to his side. Owen's unbalanced neck, shoulder, and back extension prevents forward movement of the head and arm to assist rolling to his side. Here we see Marty on extended arms, supporting his weight while turning his head to follow the toy. With increased weight bearing on extended arms, Marty has developed increased extension down to the lumbar spine and hips. This also brings his lower extremities into a strong, extended position. Prone pivoting in an attempt to obtain a toy is also seen. In this maneuver, Marty demonstrates disassociated movement of both the upper and lower extremities, which aids in right-left stability and control. Increased scapulohumeral disassociation is evident in weight bearing and weight shifting. The quick and immediate use of reach and grasp upon presentation of an object allows for many opportunities to improve control and coordination of both the shoulder and hand. Marty participates in varied play schemes of banging, turning, mouthing, transferring, and repeating sensory motor exploration with his hands. Marty also demonstrates a palmar grasp with increased digital participation, including thumb abduction and extension. By 6 months, the prone position is typically chosen for play due to greater head, shoulder, and trunk control. Here we see that Owen is still greatly challenged when prone. He demonstrates lower extremity kicking but does not possess the stability required for upper extremity play. Owen still positions his elbows behind his shoulders, making it very difficult for him to use his upper extremities to assist in head and trunk lifting. Without adequate stability, Owen is unable to use his vision or hands to explore his environment. When pulled to a sitting position, Marty is able to respond quickly, and he assists in the maneuver by actively flexing his neck forward and lifting his head from the support surface. He also uses activity in the upper extremities and abdominals to assist in the pull to sit. At 6 months, Marty is able to efficiently assist in the pull to sit and attain this position with good symmetry. Unlike Marty, Owen is only minimally able to assist in the pull-to-sit maneuver and demonstrates complete head lag until he reaches the upright position. Though we would expect a 6-month-old to assist with upper extremity pulling, we do not see this response present in Owen. Once upright, he is then able to right his head and hold it in midline briefly before it falls into lateral flexion. Now at 6 months, Marty has stable head and trunk control with strong extension through the thoracic spine. Marty is able to reach with one arm at a time, as his wide base of support gives him greater stability in the lower extremities and freedom of upper extremity movement. With emerging postural control against gravity in sitting, Marty is also able to lean forward, reach, and then re-right his trunk over his pelvis to attain the upright sitting position. He is also able to sustain a gross grasp on objects while utilizing a variety of upper extremity movements, though these movements are still ungraded in the sitting position. As we saw at 2 and 4 months, Owen is struggling to maintain his head upright and in midline when held in supported sitting. The examiner must still support him high in the chest to allow him to sustain his head upright. His trunk extension is poor, and he does not have a solid balance of trunk flexor and extensor muscles to stabilize himself. His upper extremities come down to his sides, but Owen's ability to activate his vision and his reach to explore are not observed, as he needs to work so hard just to remain upright. Marty now demonstrates full, sustained extension in his neck and upper thoracic spine, which continues down through the hips and legs. This is precisely what we would expect when testing horizontal suspension in a 6-month-old. Owen is able to lift his head symmetrically in midline and extend through the upper thoracic spine and hips. He maintains the response only briefly. Protective extension is easily and quickly elicited as Marty is tipped forward towards the surface. He props immediately on one upper extremity and is already active with the opposite extremity, reaching for a toy in front of him. When attempting to elicit a protective response, Owen does not bring his upper extremities forward to the surface to protect himself. A full protective response would be expected by 6 months. His decreased anti-gravity neck and trunk strength makes it impossible for Owen to sustain the head and trunk extension needed to free the arms to come forward during this maneuver. Marty demonstrates immediate sustained weight bearing on extended lower extremities. His hips are still slightly flexed and somewhat behind the shoulders. His head is free to turn and look around, and his arms are coming down to his sides. The upper extremities are still assisting in the posture, as evidenced by the strong upper thoracic extension. Owen does not initiate or sustain weight bearing when placed in supported standing. As we have seen in nearly all the anti-gravity positions, head and trunk control are still a challenge for Owen. This inability to sustain weight bearing makes it impossible for Owen to develop control in standing because he is unable to align his head, trunk, hips, knees, and feet in the vertical.
When observing a child, please remember to employ a surveillance mentality. Focus on the quality and the symmetry of a movement. Observe the child in more than 1 or 2 positions. Listen carefully if parents voice concern. Encourage them to monitor their child's development. Ask parents specific and targeted questions. It is our hope if you assess a child and suspect a delay, you will refer them for an evaluation by a developmental specialist or early intervention service provider as soon as possible. Early therapy services address delays in development and can help improve functional outcomes of a child. Early intervention is a great program offered in each state and refers to services given to very young children with developmental delays, generally from birth until the child turns 3. Services typically include occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy, and are typically provided in a child's home. Early intervention offices often have waiting lists, so encourage parents to set up an appointment as soon as possible. In addition, most private pediatric clinics also offer free screenings. The hope is, if therapy is provided early, children will have a better opportunity to reach their fullest potential. Thanks so much for taking the time to learn about pathways.org, the importance of tummy time, and 4 and 6 month motor development. We would appreciate you taking a moment to complete a short online survey. Your feedback will help us improve our materials and will place you on a list to be notified when future courses like this become available.